My name's Lauren, and I was born into a military family um, back in 1989, and my family thought that they were like Catholic. So we grew up, praying every once in a while, going to Easter service or midnight mass, things like that. But that was really the only religion that I had growing up. And I remember like as a young girl being probably like 6, 7 years old and praying with my mom and my brothers at night and not even really feeling like any kind of anything. Like just it was just a thing that we did. And I remember like peeking, like praying and like peeking and like why are we saying this and questioning, even that young, questioning, doubting, being confused about why we just did this thing because I didn't know the Lord at all. And as time went on, we moved from state to state and ended up in Colorado, early preteen years. And by that time, I was already starting to have like a curiosity towards things that I probably shouldn't have. Um, and my parents, bless their hearts, like whether it was, I know that it wasn't intentional, um, but coming from their background, their upbringing, I always felt like I had to perform in order to gain love. Um, I came from a very works-based, home, and I don't know if they necessarily like, intentionally meant to, lead their children in that way, but I just remember knowing that my performance gained, me approval and acceptance, and my grades mattered, um, what I did as far as sports and how good I was on the sports team and how good I was in the journalism club or the drama club, all of those things, made me who I was. And I began to find an identity in being the best in school and the best at these different things until I moved to Colorado. And coming from a small military base prior to that, it was a big culture shock moving to Colorado. And so I quickly learned that approval and acceptance in middle school didn't come from being an honor roll student out here. It's a lot different culture on the military base versus in a public school system. And so, in order to find some kind of acceptance and friends and all of that at 12, 13 years old, I started to lean towards the things that they lean towards. Um, and at the beginning, it was just, smoking a little weed, doing a little this and that. But uh, I pride myself on being the best. And so I wasn't able to be um, just dibble dabbling in things. I had to go, I'm one that goes all the way. If I do something, I go all the way. And so through my teenage years, that quickly spiraled out of control to the point where eventually I was pretty much locked up my entire teenage years. My parents had basically watched me start to infect my brothers and my behavior and my things. I was getting one of my brothers high and getting him drunk and things like that. And so, in order to protect my brothers, they were the ones seeking help and seeking uh, for the state to basically step in. I was also getting in trouble, just minor crimes and things like that prior to that. But while I was in one of these group homes, I met a boy when I was 16, and he was different. And I've always been kind of drawn to people who are different and who um, maybe are the outcasts or are strange or that, people don't really see much value in. And so I was drawn to him. And one of the first things that he told me was that he was a Satanist. And I was like, you're weird. Like, that's just weird. But it was intriguing. So over time, we began to get to know each other. Um, and he became my first serious relationship. Introduced me to Satanism, and I was so drawn to it. I was so, um, I was such a logical person and so, um, I couldn't understand anything outside of myself. I couldn't understand anything outside of what I could see, what I could touch, what I could feel. I had no eyes to see on a spiritual level. I kind of believed in energy a little bit, but to me, it made more sense that my life, I was in control of it, whether good or bad. Whatever I decided to do in my life was in my control. And Satanism completely puts your world back into your hands and tells you that you are God. And so I liked having that power. I liked having that control. I liked being in that position in my life. Unfortunately, being my own God led me to years of drug addiction, IV meth use, promiscuity. Um, I've been to prison a few times. So I definitely was not really like a great God for myself. Um, at the age of 21, I had my first son. Um, by that time, um, I was a little bit cleaned up because when I found out I was pregnant, you grit your teeth and you sit on your hands and you do the thing because you know that you're going to be a parent. And that lasted as long as that relationship lasted. Um, and once I found out, well, we had a lot of problems regardless, but once there was cheating involved and stuff, we separated, and I had immersed myself in my identity at that point, fully being, a mom to my son. So when my little family was broken up, I had nowhere else to turn. And so I turned right back to the things that I knew, drinking, and then pretty quickly, the meth will find you again. Um, Even in the newest of friends that you'd never met on the streets or any of that, they sneak in. Um, and so that pretty quickly spiraled out, and to the point that my son was taken from me and he was placed with my parents. Um, and I had the opportunity to get him back, and he said, "You just got to get clean and do these things." But by that time, um, I think I was so lost and so bound, by depression and by really my own perfectionism and my own comparison, like n- not feeling like I was good enough to be his mom. And I had just resigned myself to the fact that, like, I'm probably going to be a drug addict for the rest of my life. Um, So I didn't try to do anything. I just told my parents, like, "You guys will be better parents to him than I can be, and you take care of him." Um, I remember at one point, I even tried to convince my parents that it would probably be best if they would adopt my son, that I would sign over my rights completely. And my mom still, like, wouldn't give up. Like, she refused um, to do that. She knew in her heart of hearts that one day I would be back and that I would um, want to be a parent again and that I would turn my life around. So she didn't want to take that from me. Um, I have a grandmother who, my mom's mom, and she is a praying woman. And it was around that time that she converted from Catholicism and she was born again. And she was always, well, sometimes she was preaching at me. But there were also, as she matured in her walk, she was praying for me, and she was, you know, um, a little more gentle as she grew and she developed in her walk with Christ. But I always knew that I was going to get some kind of Jesus from her, but I didn't understand it, and it wasn't to be disrespectful or anything like that. I just could not. I couldn't understand it. It just didn't. I didn't have faith. There's a big part of, we can't really will ourselves to know God. So that's where I was stuck at. And that's around the first time that I went to prison. Did some back and forth, halfway house, prison, getting out, and all of that. And I would try, but I had never really like resigned myself to. I never surrendered. and it was still just everything in my own strength, what I could do, and I would find myself, um, getting locked up over and over. And around 25, I got out of prison again. Um, and that time was gonna be different because I got to go home I paroled and got to go home to my family. I hadn't really been around my son for all those years. I had seen him here and there, but like he didn't visit me in prison or anything like that. We didn't do all of that. Um, but I moved back in with my parents and I got to be there with my son. And the first couple weeks were cool, but after that, he didn't understand what was happening at, 5, 6 years old. And he rejected me a lot. And he would treat me like his sister. Um, and he didn't really wanna have a lot to do with me. I would go in his room and he would tell me, "I'm gonna tell my mommy." He would call me mama and he would call my mom mommy. Say, "I'm gonna tell my mommy to get you out of my room." He treated me like his sister, really. And it took a long time for me to rebuild that relationship. Um, During that time, I ended up in another relationship with a guy who had also recently gotten out of prison, and he was a Christian. And, although we had opposing beliefs, I was still very much a Satanist. Um, we meshed well for a while. Um, and I found myself in this relationship and it was good. When it was good, it was good. But me being um really still bound by things. I thought it was okay, like to drink here and there and then to encourage him to partake in these things. And even though he was trying to do right, um, I started to be his downfall and to be the his encourager to um alcohol and things that he also had issues with, and that didn't work out very well for us. Um, we turned to domestic violence and all of those kinds of things. And in this time, I'm still trying to rebuild this relationship with my son, and I've started to actually be his mom again and stuff. And so like that seems to be going well. But I'm also consumed over here by this relationship that's going downhill. And at the time I didn't notice it, but I was just going right back to the ways that I was before, ready to abandon my kid and abandon time with him, or to prioritize other things over my child. Um, and in seeing myself doing that kind of stuff, like once again, that comparison or that perfectionism of I'm not good enough, or that self-condemning spirit that I tend to carry, definitely was coming out again. And maybe he's just best with my parents. Um, we would have these up and down times, me and this guy, where sometimes it would be good and then it would go really bad. And one of the times that it was like pretty good, I was sitting on my bed and I was reading the Satanic Bible. And um, he walked in the room, and normally, whenever any kind of religious talk came up, I would argue and I would fight and I would push back. And I was very argumentative. Um, this time I don't remember exactly what was spoken about. I don't remember what he told me. But I do remember having a conversation with him about God. Um, and it was a conversation. It wasn't it wasn't a fight. And he never really used to fight with me. I would fight with him, and he would just kinda laugh at me and tell me God's gonna get you when he wants you. Um, and I used to kinda mock him, and I used to be like, "Well, here I am. Come get me, God. Where are you at?" Um, so that day we didn't argue about religion, we didn't argue about God, we didn't argue about anything. It was just a decent conversation. But that night, went to bed, and I don't remember thinking about anything or anything being, that stood out in my mind. Um, but I started to have these horrible nightmares. Um, and mind you, at this time I was drinking on a regular basis. We had the domestic violence going on. I was dibble dabbling back in meth. I hadn't done that in so many years. So I go to bed and I have these horrible nightmares. I'm having these dreams of my son in a crib in my bedroom, and I'm trying to hold the door shut to my bedroom because there's demons outside and they're trying to get in and they're trying to get my son. And I'm calling my mom on the phone, and I can see where my mom's at, and she's in a car on an overpass, and a flood is coming behind her, and she's driving really fast, talking to me, freaking out because she's about to die in this flood. Um, and then I go over to my bedroom window and I look out across the street in the driveway in the house across the street, and there's three men standing there with goat heads, like a Baphomet head. Um, And I woke up from this dream and like my heart's racing, like I've never had a dream like that before. And I'm pacing in the room and I'm crying and I'm freaking out. And my boyfriend at the time sits up and he's like, "What's going on?" And I'm telling him about this dream. And he is like white. Like he's just scared. Um, and I remember him telling me, "This is spiritual warfare. The devil doesn't want to let you go." And I'm freaking out because I have no idea about the spiritual realm at all. Like that didn't make any sense to me. I didn't believe in that. But now I'm being encountered with the reality of the supernatural. And he's scared. I'm scared. I'm telling him, "Well, pray for me or do something. Like you did this. Like what's going on? Do something." And I remember him backed up, curled up against the headboard, and him saying, I can't. I can't." And from that day forward for months, everything went downhill. My drinking became an everyday thing. Um, we were fighting crazy. It was really bad. It was very toxic. I was driving drunk everywhere. Um, just really like tormented. Uh, I became suicidal. There was a couple suicide attempts in those couple months. I got a DUI, wrecked into somebody while I was driving drunk. And I think that the craziest thing about that time, the most telling thing about that time, was that when I would get drunk, I would be angry and fighting about certain real legitimate things that are happening in front of me. But then by the end of the night or by the end of my argument, I would begin to blaspheme God. "I don't want nothing to do with your God. F your God." All of these things would just start to come out of me. That I think about it now, like that was some real spiritual warfare. But in that time, like I was mad because, he was at the strip club, and then I would turn to blaspheming God in that time. So it was a really heavy and intense few months of spiritual warfare, until I ended up getting the DUI, and then I wasn't really able to do a whole lot. Um, and then at some point, I was just depressed, just drugged down. I had really no will but to, just take shots of whiskey and take Tylenol PMs and sleep, while my parents took care of my kid in the other room or in the rest of the house. Um, I went back to self-harming, something that I hadn't done since I was a teenager. Um, all of that stuff that I thought that I had overcome, was bubbling back up. And then somebody invited me to church, and I didn't even believe in God. I can't even tell you what made me decide to go. I don't remember that, like, I'm gonna go and this is gonna change my life. I'll just say flat out, I don't believe that my original intention was to really seek God. Um, but I believe that my soul knew that I needed something and what I was doing wasn't working. Um, and so I went to a pretty big community church for it was about 6 months. This person accompanied me to church for all this time. Um, and I liked it. It was a good stepping stone. I can see now how God used that time because it was a big enough church that I could kind of get lost in the crowd and hide, in the back. Nobody really talked to me, but I didn't really want to be seen at that point. Um, but I remember also just feeling different. Like, I remember things were just starting to go better. There was a little bit more peace in my life. That relationship was still happening, back and forth and stuff, but like it was much easier to like not drink or to not act a fool um when we were having problems. So then uh as I continued to go to this church and like try to read the Bible, I still didn't believe in God. It was just a really good like feel good message to me. It was a good self-help class, really is what I took it as. The Bible was a good self-help book. And um over time, um we don't realize that God's working in us, but that's what he was doing. And because of that relationship that I was in, I was really seeking out like relationship advice because I still wanted to make this work. And I had come across a pastor on social media that I would listen to, um, Marcus Rogers, and he was preaching a lot at that time on relationships and talking about um, healthy relationships and all of that. And so I was really drawn to like his preaching, just because it kind of resonated with the season that I was in at that time. Um, then I found out that he was coming to Denver, to preach, and I had to get there. And once again, I'll be transparent. I didn't go for God. I went to go listen to Marcus Rogers preach, and I had no idea what to expect. I'm not usually one that will just walk into a place where I don't know anybody or anything that, by myself. Like it's kind of awkward to me, but I just felt like I needed to go. And so I go to this little church on the corner of First and Knox. And when I first walk in, I was a little bit mind blown. Um, there was probably about 5 women at the front at the altar. They were dressed very modestly, which for me that was uh uncomfortable because I didn't really dress that. I wasn't really promiscuous in my dress, but like I could tell that they were intentional about how they were dressed, and I was like, "Oh no, I'm not going to fit in here." Um, and they were praying in tongues. And I remember looking around and wondering if I came to the wrong place and do they even speak English here? I was very confused, had never even heard of tongues before in my life. And so it was very awkward for me. Um, I remember walking to the front and they were the only ones there. I sat down in the aisle of the third row. There was nobody else there. I was early. Um, at some point, Pastor Glenn walked past me and said hello to me. Um, and eventually a lot of people started to show up. It was a revival. Um, and that night, I don't remember the message that was preached, but I remember that that night was my first encounter with the Lord. And I left from that place knowing that God was real. I remember being at that altar and feeling the Lord, feeling the heat from the top of my head to the soles of my feet. Like people say, I remember lifting my hands and just knowing, just having a knowing that God is real. I even had to go sit in my truck for like half an hour because I was like shaking, like God is real, like this is real. A couple weeks later, they were having another revival at the church. And I was really battling at that point too, because I really felt like just a lot of condemnation. It was just a whole lot of condemnation because of this relationship. I felt like I was the one who did this. I was the one who caused all these problems. He was drinking really bad, back to selling drugs, you know, back to the strip clubs, all of the things. And now that I knew God was real, I had this crazy belief at that time that, like, all right, like, God's gonna use me to save him, and we're gonna be this great whatever power couple, whatever. Um, and but I couldn't get over um my part to play in it. I was really starting to recognize that it was my part in things. Um, when they had the next revival, I went to that, and um it was a 3-night revival, and it was on the 3rd night that I had this urge, like, I need to speak up and say something, because I'm here, but I have no idea, like, really what's going on. Like, I don't know the next step. Like, I believe God's real, but, like, everybody's talking about, like, repentance and these things, and, like, giving your life to God. Like, I didn't know what any of that meant. Like, I didn't understand any of that. Um And so there was another pastor's wife there, and for some reason, I felt like I needed to talk to her and open up and say something. Um, and I was, like, shy, and I was scared. And so I'm standing at the altar, and she's standing next to me, and I can't, get myself to say something, and then she ends up walking away. Um And I'm like, "Okay, well, if she comes back, like, I'll say something." And then, of course, she comes back, and she is, like, just walking all around me. So finally, I'm just like, "Okay." And so I say, like, "This is where I'm at, and this is what I've believed for the past 12 years. Like, this is what, the lifestyle that I've lived for the past 12 years. But now I know that God's real, and, like, what do I do from here?" And immediately she's like, "You need to be born again." Um And I will say that that encounter that I had with God that night, anytime that I doubt or struggle or wonder, because I still question things, anytime that I get to that place, I remember the Lord touching me that night. And when I hold on to that and I think about that time, and I know that I know that I know that he's there and he loves me, and the work that he did just in that moment with my logical mind and encountering me in such a supernatural way. That moment keeps me. It always keeps me. And I've had other moments since then, but that moment, that first encounter with God, that's the moment that I always have to lean back on and press into when I'm unsure of things, or um when things are rough, because as much as we'd like this life to be easy, it's not. Um and so that was my first encounter with the Lord. Um and looking back, recognizing that he had to meet me in that supernatural way. He had to meet me in a way that was foreign to me, that I didn't understand, um, for me to understand that he is real, that he is there. Um, since then, I've stayed planted in the same church and all of that. Um, but I think that, uh, yes, I've had sobriety for however many years. I'm going to say 6 years now, and all of that. But where I see him, working the most in me right now, and it's a struggle. It's hard, but, accepting grace and understanding that my performance isn't where my value is derived from. Um, I believe that he's breaking strongholds off of me, and that with my parenting and my own, children, and the ways that I do things with them. By no means am I perfect, but I see his patience and his mercy, just he's just, so steadfast and just very long suffering with me. Uh I still fall back into my logical mind and analyzing things and my own fleshly opinions and all of that stuff. But I definitely see his continued work um, in my life, and I know that that's an area that he's trying to really really cultivate in me, because I believe that that's where the majority of my downfall came from, was just believing that I had to do in order to be, and that's not how he created me to be.
Is there any advice that you give to somebody right now that's struggling and searching for that void filled? What would be the first step to seek that relationship? What would be that first step?
To me, even though I didn't believe in God, I remember praying before I went to that first revival service, and I remember driving there and saying, "If you're real, show me you're real." Um, for me, that was, I believe, the me being willing to let my guard down and to surrender and say, "Okay, I'm inviting you in. If you're real, show me." Um, and being willing to accept, because that's fine. Accepting something outside of myself was really hard for me at that time. Um, I could say that, go to the church and do all the things and this and that. But we find people all the time who go to the church who really don't know the Lord and really don't even have that encounter with him. You ask, like, "Hey, like, what was your first encounter like?" And they like, "Oh, well, I've known God my whole life." But if you're willing and ready to ask him to really see him, he'll let you. He says, "Ask, seek, and you shall find me." So just having that heart that's surrendered, really.
Thank you for sharing that with us.
When I